right. How are we doing all tonight? Everybody hear me? Probably not. Okay, there we go. Sorry, OBS just updated, so I'm not entirely certain everything's working. Let me know if things sound all right. All these extra... Why? Out of curiosity. So, how's everybody doing tonight? Has everybody been staying off the internet? It's probably for the best if you have. Stay off of Twitter, that's for sure. Nobody there on there is sane tonight or the entire day. Totally out there. It has been a day. I hate when things happen on dialysis days. So yesterday was a dialysis day, and yesterday was Trump's attempted assassination day. And I hate when those things happen because the smart thing to do is to hop on and give your unfiltered thoughts, because everyone's going to be looking for someone to say something. However, the responsible thing to do is to not say anything because you don't know what's happening yet. And that was yesterday in a nutshell. Nobody knows what's happening, and everybody was talking, and I think Brooks might have been a little alarmist yesterday, to be perfectly frank. It was not a good day yesterday, one way or the other. Before we get into any of this tonight, I want to acknowledge the fact that a man died who wasn't the shooter. A man died, and he had 2 kids. He was a firefighter, and I mean, people are posting things on Twitter of him not being totally nice, but his family's still gonna miss him. And his name is Corey Compatore. Or rather, it was. And a number of people were wounded yesterday, and none of that's good, right? None of that is okay. And irregardless, like, we don't know yet. We don't really know what Thomas Matthew Crooks, the shooter, motive was. You can't tell what his motive was from his political registration. You can't tell what his motive was from a donation to Act Blue. We don't know what the shooter's motive, and I don't really think the shooter's motive is that important, to be honest. Like, why they did this is kind of irrelevant, because in and of itself, this has taken on a life of its own beyond anything that you really can understand. Like, we don't know what's happened, but everyone is perfectly willing to put their own interpretation and spin on all of this. And everyone's willing to say, well, this is the end of the election, blah, 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 blah. We don't know that either. This is a difficult time. But it's not where this began. Like, everyone is pretending that this is something new and horrifying. Not really where this began, and I mean, it's not really even something I can say for sure where it began, but I want to start tonight by talking about someone else that has kind of become forgotten in the last the last 20 years, really, when you get down to it. And it's a man by the name of George Tiller. George Tiller was a doctor. He was a doctor. He provided late-term abortions. He was one of the few providers of late-term abortions in his area. And George Tiller was murdered in spring of 2009. And what's unique about this isn't that George Tiller was murdered. What's unique about George Tiller as a case is what happened, how this came about. How did this doctor who provides abortion somehow become known nationally? And the answer to that question is Bill O'Reilly and Fox News. So Bill O'Reilly, something on the order of close to 30 times, would mention George Tiller on his program back when he was a Fox News opinion host. And it would always be in uncomplimentary terms. Like he multiple occasions called him George Tiller, the baby killer. And he repeated this. This became a catchphrase. In fact, it was repeated by a member of the House of Representatives. And George Tiller was just this doctor, just this man who, this cable news host, focused all this ire on and talked about how George Tiller was killing babies and murdering them. And he talked about terms of how George Tiller would kill a baby if you were slightly depressed or what, and over again. And this point was hammered home. And then one day, George Tiller was shot in the head by an anti-abortion activist. And that's a nice way of putting it, because we put these things very politely when it's a right-winger. We put these things very politely with an American conservative that's doing it. That's an anti-abortion activist. What it is a terrorist, really, right? Come on, it's a terrorist. And this is kind of before we were talking about stochastic terrorism, this happened. And everyone at the time was like, I think Bill O'Reilly kind of bears some blame for that. Because Bill O'Reilly's sitting here and talking about how this guy repeatedly, again and again and again, is murdering children, how he's protecting pedophiles. It's a playbook you might recognize if you've been listening to trans dialogue in the United States recently. It's the same playbook. And political violence isn't new. It didn't just pop up yesterday. And I know that sounds absurd, but it kind of feels like it to some people, apparently. Like you had the interminable, spineless little, I shouldn't swear as much, I'm a YouTube partner now, spineless little individual, Wick TV, getting on and going, political violence is not acceptable, and picking his little fight with Destiny yesterday. And that was hilarious in and of itself, because Wick, whenever he wants to substitute his lack of personality, he just yells and screams. I mean, he did that yesterday, and so that was fun. But political violence has been a factor in American life for quite some time. The Pulse nightclub, that was something that's happened. It affects so many people in our community. It was here in Colorado. Not Pulse. Pulse was Florida. There was that nightclub here in Colorado. Yeah, they're all bleeding together. And it's not uncommon. It's a thing that continues to happen again and again and again. And it's not little tiny Twitter accounts. Like you can say, oh, there are people on the left who advocate for violence. Like, okay, Bob 478 420 is saying that we should kill people, with all 16,000 of his followers. But now you have politicians who are sitting out. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene doing advertisements with, like, campaign advertisements with guns. Right? What is that supposed to say? Why is that a political context? Why you have Republican politicians for decades now talking about Second Amendment remedies when they don't like what Democrats are doing? How is that not an explicit call to violence? And it's wild to me. It's been wild to me to see these arguments. These conservatives are enraged about this. They're like, someone took a shot at Trump, and we don't even know why they did it. But everyone's saying, well, it's very clear that the Democrats have been saying that Trump is a threat to democracy, and that's irresponsible. Is it? I think that argument's silly. If someone's a threat to democracy, maybe we shouldn't be saying, well, we should beat him at the ballot box. Maybe we should going, that person should probably be arrested if they're such a threat to democracy. But is that really the same thing? I don't think so. On the whole, I can't think of too many times where a Democratic politician has said, you know what we should do? We should turn around and start killing Republicans. I can't think of when that happens. But I can think of plenty of times when a Republican politician has implied that we should start harming people that don't agree with them. How many trans people have sat and watched CPAC speeches where various anti-trans activists, and we're calling them anti-trans activists again, get up and say we have to destroy the trans agenda. What's the trans agenda? We have to stop them from transing the kids. What are they doing? What are they doing to kids? And this rhetoric, and we've turned the concept of pedophilia into a political slur. I'm sure that was well advised. That wasn't a problem at all, but here it is. And these are the people who are lecturing us. The people who are talking about Second Amendment remedies are the ones lecturing us about how we have to tone down the rhetoric. We aren't the ones who toned up the rhetoric. We aren't the ones who sit here and almost slavishly root for conflict and civil wars. We aren't the ones who walked into protests in 2020 and started trying to incite violence. So here it is. The Leopards Eating Face Party has been releasing leopards into the wild for decades, hoping that they're going to eat people's faces. And now one of the leopards has eaten the face of the Leopards Eating the Face Party, and they're outraged and shocked, and suddenly the leopards are a problem. All these leopards are now an issue. And we, you and I who have sat here saying, please stop releasing leopards, now are being told that we must clean up the leopards. I don't think so. If the rhetoric has to be toned down, it needs to start at home for the conservatives. Because we have been saying, please don't do this. Please stop talking about shooting us now for decades. And now, all of a sudden, I cannot help but notice that it's a problem when it's done to Trump. The governor of Michigan, there was a plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. And they said, oh, you're overreacting. Shouldn't call that terrorism. No. That's outrageous. Groups stormed the Capitol building on January 6th, and we have spent the last 3 years arguing about whether or not it technically constitutes an insurrection. We have a Supreme Court that's perfectly happy to completely trash the Constitution anytime Donald Trump asks them to. We had a whole amendment designed to keep men like Donald Trump from taking office. Oh, you got ahead of me here. Thank you, NJD, for the 10 gifted memberships. And we will talk about that in a hot second. You have a whole group of people trying to argue that oh, January 6th was not that big a deal. This is the end result of that. It's not the rhetoric about Donald Trump being a threat to democracy. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. That's unequivocal. And we should do something about that, much more severe than voting him out. We have an amendment to the Constitution that says if you committed an insurrection, you cannot hold federal office. That should be the end of the discussion. Why is he on the ballot? But here we are. Here we are. So tonight I want to revisit something. Tonight, I want to revisit our old friend Whatifalthist, and a video I've talked about before in a kind of badly audio video essay. I know, all my audio is bad. Whatifalthist, who will win America's next civil war? Because here's one of those people who's very much desperate for a civil war. We've also stolen from our good friend President Sunday a fun concept. A theory meter. Where'd it go? No, wrong end. I can do this. I'm a professional. It's a small theory meter. Well, thank you much. It's a very small theory meter. However, it's there. It's an easy theory meter. $25. Super chats, super stickers, memberships, all count towards it. And we've put 10 on the board, and I hope I've done that correctly. See, it's hard to sell on OBS when you're moving the damn thing. I think we're one up too. Once we hit the theory meter, we will gracefully bow out of whatever we're doing and start talking about theory. It's a $25 theory meter, unlike some people. I'm not yet too big for my britches. So here's where we're going to go tonight. We're going to cover Whatifalthist for a little while. We're going to talk about this again because, yep, I'm one too many up. That's not the right button. No. We're going to talk about Whatifalthist. And if we hit the theory, we're going to talk about Jomini and why nations go to war. And look, it's a theory for $25. It's a value. You're getting a steal. But before we do this, I want to talk about something else because a lot of people have been scared about the concept of the election coming up. And I want to talk about the 5 C's of history again. And number 5, contingency, is important tonight. Contingency is the concept that you have a set of events that are possible based on what has happened in the past. These are possible outcomes that are coming up based on previous events, but they are not in any way predictable. I know things look scary right now if you're in America and you don't want Donald Trump to win. I know it feels oppressive right now. But when people tell you that it's already over, you live in one of the most contingent times in American history. Anything can happen. So even if you're concerned, even if you're scared, even if it looks hopeless, I want you to remember that we can change this still. It looks tricky right now. It looks hard. It looks and I will admit it looks kind of tricky. It looks not great, but we can change it. Contingency means that we what's not set in stone is still to be influenced. It means that you have an opportunity to change what happens. That the past does not ordain the future. And it's a really important concept in historical thinking. It understanding contingency and understanding the limits of what you can say and do and predict is a very vital thing to being good at history. It's one of these basics you're taught. It's this little basic skill set. So speaking of contingency, let's come back to Whatifalthist. Oh, thank you, Pippa, for the 5 gifted memberships. Now let's see if I'm going to have to probably work on all of this. Here we go. That is, I can work that. That works. All right, let us begin.
The last version of this video a couple years ago. God, I was back in high school back then. I had no idea how bad things would get over the next couple years. Since then, we've seen both political parties in America claim the election results are faulty. The Capitol was stormed by rebels. The major cities of the Pacific Northwest literally had rebellions, with violent riots spreading across the country.
Now, I don't know about you, but I missed the Northwest having a rebellion. It was quite the time. But let's carry on. Like, they had a sit-in. There was a sit-in in Seattle and a sit-in in Portland. It wasn't a rebellion. Let's not be dramatic.
And the nation is more polarized than ever. This is a video to make an honest and brutal look at.
I also want to point out the hilarity of people keep trying to say the nation is more polarized than ever, when bleeding Kansas is a thing that happened, and the American Civil War is a thing that happened, and midwit opinions get repeated by Whatifalthist on the regular.
How another American Civil War would break out, who would win, what factors would set it up, and the like. We're here to tackle the $10 trillion question of if the world's hegemon will be consumed by the fires of its own division.
I think this has an ad. I don't remember. It does.
I lived in as a teenager, which is one of the most important swing areas in all of.
It should be noted, Whatifalthist also lived in Pennsylvania, rather. So he probably has feelings about yesterday. I think Tyler will probably talk about that tomorrow.
America, and that it often determines who wins the whole presidential election. I went to two different grocery stores, a Whole Foods and a Wegmans. The horrible thing is that I can immediately tell the politics of the grocery store within 20 seconds. Whole Foods put a massive emphasis on organic.
No, you cannot. You cannot tell the politics of a grocery store by entering into it and saying, wow, there's organic food here. It must be soy cuck liberals. You cannot tell the politics. Like, you're not helping, son.
Free trade or vegetarian foods. The people dress differently in both places, and I actually got weird looks for dressing as I normally do. I could go on like 15 other things.
All right. If you've watched the video I did on this, you know I spent some time on Whatifalthist's chart here. It's bad. It's spectacularly bad. Let's go into it for funsies. Food. Presumably, see the right and left ways of life. First of all, right and left, and then he inverts them here on the chart. So that's not confusing at all. Presumably, blue is left. Vegetarian, tofu, health foods, exotic foreign goods. Acai, which is just what? Low fat. Traditional Western meat and potatoes, high fat. I'm a leftist, and I eat meat and potatoes when I can eat potatoes. Potatoes are bad, lots of potassium, dialysis no good. We're just going to give everyone memberships tonight. Thank you, Paul Fletcher, for the 5 gifted memberships. We're not even going to stay on Whatifalthist very long, are we? Clothes, casual streetwear, bright colors, revealing, unexpected. Casual streetwear and revealing are mutually exclusive fashion categories. Formal, traditional, modest, dark colors. No, formal, traditional, modest, and dark colors just means that you're a Cortexiphan kid from the show Fringe. This is bog wild to me. Worship, religious experience comes to furthering progressive causes for oppressed groups in the public sphere. What? I don't... If you could find me a church, that's true of anywhere, I'd be surprised. What? And then it comes from traditional religion. What is traditional religion? There's a huge overlap with alt health and right-wing conspiracy theories. There is. As a matter of fact, a patron has made a request for me to do a video essay on it. We are in the process of writing that at the moment. we're going to talk about the antediluvian world as well, because it turns out crazy in politics has a very long and storied tradition in America. Whatifalthist. Okay, this is my personal favorite. Sex and love. Kinky, non-heteronormative, equal between men and women. Consent is very important. Right-wing sex, vanilla, heteronormative, follows traditional male-female gender roles. First of all, they did a survey, and they've done multiple surveys, like anonymously, and they found out that evangelicals are actually surprisingly kinky, first of all. Second of all, I love the implication that he makes that consent is only important to liberals. As if there's, like, was Marx kinky? Marx was, I don't know the answer to that. Marx was certainly not monogamous. This is loaded with so many assumptions, though, and like it shapes what people think is happening when they talk like this. And art exists to challenge social assumptions. It's purposely offensive to challenge worldviews. Art exists to fulfill traditional expectations of beauty. Conservatives have made transgressive art. Teach. Not teaching. Teach. Good evening, Zena. Teachers exist to empower their students. They will teach them how to change the world in a positive way and engineer them to be better people. Yes. Teaching exists to prepare students to be stable members of society, knowing about their society, ethics, and useful skills. Also, yes. None of this is, like, strictly delineated. I know conservative vegetarians. I know leftists who wear formal clothes, although none of them apparently work for progressive victory.
Where we're at the point where conservatives and progressives talk, dress, worship, teach, eat, love, and literally about everything else differently. It's so strange to go from Kansas City to Boston and see that people's politics are everywhere to see. I was driving across...
Oh no, you might have just discovered that politics is ever present because all things are political. Imagine that.
Pennsylvania to Ohio a couple weeks ago, and I saw about 5 different Trump signs along the highway, with even one burnt into the grass, alongside countless signs telling people to find God and that abortion...
A Trump sign burnt into the grass is not a Trump sign so much as it is a Klan rally.
Abortion is wrong. Likewise, I'm in Los Angeles right now, and I briefly lived in New York, and in both places, you will see overtly left-wing signs and billboards in the street. When people tell me social justice isn't a real movement,
the humanity, left-wing signs in the street.
I just point to how Times Square had a giant billboard about encouraging Latinx stories from Disney. The craziest place I've ever been to in America was Portland, Maine, where it seems like a majority of shops had some kind of social justice virtue signaling messages. All of this is...
First of all, the craziest place I've ever been to in America was a little rest stop with a gas station on halfway between Texas and Illinois, and I'm pretty sure that place only existed for those 5 minutes I was there, and then disappeared entirely. Portland, Maine isn't even the top 5 of the craziest places in America. There are some weird places in America. For example, there's a town of Greeley, Colorado. Greeley, Colorado is the weirdest place I've ever been to. It continues to exist, but it's like the kind of town that Kirk and Spock go to in Star Trek as a planet, and it's like harboring a dark secret, and no one knows about it till you get there, and you work out, you find the computer that's behind the closed door rock face thing. Like, it's a weird town, I swear to God. And everyone I've talked to in Colorado about the town of Greeley agrees, even if they're from Greeley.
Is so shocking when you put it into perspective that in living memory, or back in the 40s and 50s, political polarization was basically absent from America. California at the time was known for being an anti-partisan state in which there was so little interest.
There's never been a time when partisanship was absent from America. You have literally had a two-party duopoly in the United States since the second president of the United States took office. It's just not even true. Like, what is it as overtly hostile as it has been at certain times? No, maybe not nearly as much, but you have always had partisanship and disagreement and debate in the United States. These are not new concepts.
In political parties, that candidates would often run on both Democrat and Republican platforms at the same time, or just not declare what party they were running for. A government report in 1949 said Americans actually needed more political polarization since the Republicans and Democrats didn't give the voters any real choices, really sinning for the same things. If anything, the political parties at the time stood for ethnic and religious things rather than actual policies. However, we all know that America is a divided country now, but can things really get as bad as a civil war? We're in a modern civilized country. Will we really degrade towards killing our own people with guns, missiles, and axes? And has anything like this happened before?
Why axes? Why axes? Like guns, missiles, and axes. Of the panoply of weaponry, why axes? That is actually probably a map he took from somewhere else. Yeah, that's a county election map. This one he might have done. Yeah, no, he stole this one and started putting his own crap on it. Democrats, Southerners, like 1948 wasn't even that. The West apolitical. The West has never been apolitical. The West is the libertarian West for a reason.
Policies. Grade towards. There are a couple different models or theories that people use to predict history. I think a lot of them have validity, but really shouldn't be treated as religious truths and should be taken with a tremendous amount of common sense. For my years of...
The brilliant historian Honoré de Rancourt described history as like a spiral, seeing repeating patterns, but the system getting bigger and more complex each time. Okay, again, I have again and again stated, you cannot really predict history, like predict the future based off of history. That's not how it works.
Studying on this topic, it seems plausible history has cycles, but none of them are clean repeats, since history has hundreds of cycles operating at the same time, smashing together,
Congratulations, you've just figured out why your own theory is stupid.
Resulting in mass chaos and the adventure that we will have to live through in the future. However, there are a couple different ways that you could predict the US having another civil war over the next few decades. The first is a generational perspective. The short explanation is that for reasons that are not entirely clear, the English-speaking world has some kind of massive external conflict.
The American Civil War. World War II. Why is World War I not a crisis in Anglo-America? Why is the Cold War not a crisis? Why is the Cuban Missile Crisis not a crisis? The Cuban Missile Crisis has crisis in the name. American Civil War, like 1860. We skip off this. Like what? You can pick any peg, like, and he does. The Hotspurs Rebellion is incredibly almost inconsequential in the face of the rest of these. You can peg these like any time you want, and you can start picking. Oh, there's a thing that happened 20 years later. It's like it does not matter. You can make this fit whatever you want it to fit.
Or civil war every 80 years that spurs it. For short order, the last one was World War II. Before that, the US Civil War, then the American Revolution. Before that, the English Civil War. Before that, the Spanish Armada. Then the Wars of the Roses, Hotspurs.
Also, the Spanish Armada wasn't really a crisis. Like, the Spanish Armada, at least the first one, was kind of like they sent a fleet. Be a shame if a storm happened to it. Oh, a storm happened to it.
Rebellion, and you could go back onward to the Anglo-Saxons. William Strauss and Neil Howe wrote a book about this in 1991 called Generations that posited a theory of generations that says that certain kinds of generational archetypes play out over time. It goes something like the idealistic boomers birth the alienated and materialistic Gen X, who in turn create the sheltered and, as Strauss and Neil mistakenly predicted, leaderly millennials, and it goes on after that. They trace us back to the Middle Ages, and the 1990s predicted America would have a massive political crisis on the scale of the American Revolution, Civil War, or World War II in the 2020s. The second...
You can just, again, do this with anyone. Like, it's not really... These are not predictive models. They're just people doing pareidolia and guessing patterns.
Second model is the Turchin Hackett Fisher model, which my loyal fans are probably vomiting right now from having heard way too much before about in my previous videos. David Hackett Fisher, in his brilliant book The Great Wave, showed how societies go through periodic collapses every few centuries, driven by declines in wages caused by population growth and global...
The reason you can either count it as the French Revolution or World War I is that Europe was supposed to have an awful collapse in the late 19th century. The reason you saw such awful Victorian poverty is due to overpopulation. No. Poverty is generally a result of the fact that when certain aspects of society are able to gain more money than they are willing to give out. Poverty is due to poor wages. It's not like, oh, there just wasn't enough money to go around because there were too many poor people. However, Western Europe skipped that secular cycle through colonialism and industrialization. Well, then why were they poor? In Eastern Europe, which industrialized much later, it was too little too late. To do what? This is why the world wars were so savage and genocidal in East Europe, while being more civilized and... holy fuck. I don't know what aspect of World War II you might call more civilized in perhaps France and Germany and like no. The Holocaust happened in France as well. Like, we pay attention to certain aspects of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe as uniquely horrible because a lot of horrifying things were tied, but French victims of the Holocaust were killed, and more to the point, it wasn't like in France the Wehrmacht itself took a lead role in that. It wasn't like it was civilized. Like, dear God, please someone have the $5.
Globalization. The most recent examples in the European world, depending on how you count, were World War I or the French Revolution. Peter Turchin expanded upon this theory beautifully, creating a coherent theory of how...
No, he didn't.
How they work, showing how they happen roughly every 250 years going back into the Bronze Age, and then making computer models with roughly every 250 years going back into the Bronze Age.
1500 BC, the collapse of the Indus Valley and the Minoans. No, the Minoans didn't collapse in 1200 BC, the collapse of the Bronze Age system. These are separate events. Like, they're not connected. And then it's not 250 years. It's close to 500 is his next one. The Warring States period in China, collapses in Greece, and who collapsed in Greece? And collapse of Babylon and Egypt to Persia. Greece wasn't a coherent entity in that way, nor was Italy. And Greek culture survived well into '50 BC, the collapse of Rome and the Han Dynasty, I assume. And then the Han collapse again, apparently in 200 AD, which is actually closer to accurate. 600, the plague of Justinian, the Byzantine Persian Wars. It would be correctly called the Sassanids. Collapse of Sui, which is another Chinese dynasty. We're all over the place here. 900, the collapse of the Franks. Also, that's 400 years later. Abbasids and Tang. The Black Death, 100 Years' War, collapse of Tamerlane in the Middle East, the Ottoman pillaging. Why is that a collapse? Tamerlane is considered a golden age leader. 1650, the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War starts in 1618. Not that interested in being charitable these days. I'm really not. I've been reading far too much nonsense from people over the last 24 hours. Manchu conquest of China, time of troubles, English Civil War. Like the 30 Years' War is a huge event, but it's over by 1615. It ends in 1648. 1900 AD, World War I in Eastern Europe. World War I happened throughout the world. That's why it's called World War I. The famines of 1871, which is not happening in 1900.
And then making computer models which, using his inputs, were able to predict when historic crises like the Black Death, wars of religion, Russian revolutions, and the like on the timescales they actually happened at. His models in 2010 predicted the US would have a horrifying crisis in the 2020s. The final model is that by...
Is the horrifying crisis that I have to watch this video again? Does that count?
Spengler, Karl, Quigley, Amaury Duriancourt, and Fabry. For reference, two of those authors are some of the most respected of the last century. If the...
No, they're not. No one reads Spengler anymore, except as a joke. Fabry, I mean, no. Again, Fabry is just budget Spengler.
Strauss house cycles take 80 years to play out, and Church and Fisher take 250 years. Then the Spengler-Amaury ones take 2,500. For each of these theories, I'm having a text wall to explain their intricacies, but in their models, civilizations...
Nor do you explain their intricacies at all.
Go through life cycles starting in spring and ending in winter, largely in which civilization loses its vigor due to the world changing.
You pay me $200, I'll start reading Spengler on stream.
And declines in religiosity. However, all these authors say roughly the same thing. They say the West...
Yes, because they were all sitting around basically doing a giant intellectual circle jerk. Parallels between the Greeks and Romans / Europeans and Americans. The Europeans and Greeks lived in a small political units within their era of disunity, producing a large amount of culture but not empire. Meanwhile, due to their process of colonialism, they produced the Romans and the Americans, who aren't as culturally brilliant, but produce things of immense scale. Okay. If the Europeans and Greeks are living in small units, political units, in the era of disunity, then how are they doing colonialism? The Greeks, why wasn't that a basic question you asked? The Greeks and Europeans killed each other in ethnic civil wars, while were threatened by similar barbarian peoples, or the Russians and Macedonians. After a spurt of colonization, whether Alexander or colonialism, they fell into a series of local wars that the Americans and Romans, in order to protect the weaker, culturally developed states against the better organized... What? Even trying to parse out the difference, like the Greeks and Roman part from the European part, that sentence is painful. Was this written by Biden? The Romans and Americans set up various self-governance systems. Everyone sets up self-governance systems. However, inability to deal with external threats like the Russians, who I don't recall the Russians being a significant issue for the Romans, considering the Russians didn't exist yet, as well as an inability to coordinate between the Greek and European states, forced Americans and Romans to take more. Like, is this alt history? Because if there's an American Roman team up, I want to see it. Like that would be a thing to see. Both Romans and Americans took top talent from Greece and Europe, while also allowing their colonial empires to decay. When did they get colonial empires? Look, I want to see the Greeks and the Romans team up to fight against the Russians on behalf of Greece and Europe. I want to see that. The proxy war of Greece, of Rome and America fighting Russia on behalf of Greece and Europe. That would be totally a thing. Like Legionnaires and U.S. Marines having a duel with like whatever the hell he thinks the Russians are at this point. And there's like Greek hoplites and there's Europeans, I don't know, apparently not being Americans.
West and its current philosophic evolution is in the same place as ancient Rome was in roughly 100 BC. Fabry and Amaury de Riaucourt wrote very powerful books that break this down on a really fascinating level. To simplify, like the late Roman Republic, we see a world largely dominated by a single superpower republic, with turbulent internal politics and declining belief in social institutions. Instead is the rise of extremely rich, strong men who lead the urbanized, atomized, and impoverished population with promises to fix everything. Religion has declined precipitously and the economy is centralized, resulting in most people working for some mega corporation. Local cultures have been...
And that mega corporation is Walmart. Walmart funds the entire Roman American versus Russian war. The Walton family is behind it all.
Been smashed by the globalizing influence of the dominant one. The previously massive difference between political parties, the optimares and populares in Rome's case.
Okay, first of all, the best conservative aristocratic party. To try to compare the optimates and the populists as political parties is to misunderstand Roman society generally. These are separate ruling bodies. They're not parties such as it is. They are political institutions. So, like, you get senators, and then you have the council of an exact name is going to escape me. It's like the Gracchus brothers who take their issue to the people of like redistributing land, and it's not a party insofar as it is a different body. It's like having a bicameral house almost system where you have kind of competitive like upper and lower houses. It's not a party system. When did the Romans kill off their aristocrats? What? Caesar was an aristocrat. Sulla was an aristocrat. Mark Antony was an aristocrat. All of these people were aristocratic. They were situated like Caesar was tribune. Sulla was dictator. You didn't get that job because you were Joe Blow on the street. Mark Antony was a world-renowned jerk.
Case have since been transcended by cults of personality. As you can probably tell, I want to talk about this all day, but this rabbit hole goes so much deeper, and thus I'll make some video in the near future about is America the next Rome?
We've been there. We've seen it. It happened already. It was bad. He said Rome is in the center of the map apropos of nothing. I don't know what that even means anymore. Like, does he think this is a game? No, he does. He thinks it's a game. I shouldn't even ask that question. I know the answer to that.
where I go into greater detail about this. As people, we swim in the ocean of the incentive structures created by the physical and ideological worlds around us.
She gets so close sometimes. Like he's almost hitting on Marxism and then misses. People are affected by their materialist conditions. Just say materialist conditions. Just do it. Do it.
In the same way that those fish are mostly water that came from the sea around them, it's difficult for us to see how our environments created us and how we act. The Americans of today who want to destroy white men...
Well, we aren't fish. We have a much more substantive sense of self.
And from curriculums are descendants of the men who fought on the beaches of Normandy within living memory. However, the way our society is set up incentivizes Americans to hate each other. In order to...
Why? Why does it do that?
Understand how America could have a civil war, we have to see the incentives of what pushes Americans to feel desperate enough to turn on their own people. The answer I'm going to give is that Americans today live poor and sad lives, which makes them feel the need to turn to violence for any hope of changing anything. This might sound strange from historic standards, where it's normal to see populations starve or in complete poverty, but pain is pain, and thus still painful, and the America of today is serious.
Pain is pain, and thus still painful. Tautology is tautology, and thus tautological. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'll be here all week.
Problems. As I've said more clearly in this video, normal Americans have seen their standards of living decline precipitously over the last 50 years as wages have stayed the same while the cost of living has gone up. Just look at The Simpsons or stuff like John Hughes movies, where working class characters have multiple children, own their homes, and go on vacation as norms in the 1980s, which is unimaginable today even for young upper middle class people. As I've described in these videos as well, the collapses in social communities and amounts of sex among Americans create a restless, angry, and crazy population. Humans are by nature sexual and social beings. Once you remove the ability to have children, which almost no young people can afford today, enter relationships or have balanced social communities, societies lose their way and descend into barbarism and tribalism. These factors are most...
Okay. Tribalism is a form of society. It is a social organization. It is, in fact, a society. I don't. We have a very old-fashioned view of what civilization is here, Rudyard.
Heavily concentrated among young men, which are the demographic you least want to piss off. In many ways, the fate of a country depends on how it treats its young men, who with their
population spikes in the course of history. How nations with the young drive the future. 1800, France and Britain, industrialization and the Napoleonic Wars. How does this relate to having young, like, are there not children in not France and Britain? Did all the children go away? What kind of 1800s dystopian young adult novels were there? All the children have gone to England to star in Charles Dickens novels. Please, sir, may I have some more? That damn Charles Dickens has stolen all the children. Yeah, there is a look, let's set aside Whatifalthist for a moment. You do not need to find fulfillment in other people. You can quite find fulfillment sitting quietly with yourself. Relationships are nice. It's nice to feel loved. It's nice to feel wanted. But this should not be the thing upon which you drive your world. This is silly. Let's keep going.
Their boundless testosterone and energy push forwards in any direction they can. An excess of young men must either push outwards as a team or else start to kill itself. The reason most societies marry couples off at age 15 in arranged marriages is to make sure young men become sexually satisfied and stakeholders in society as fast as possible.
Yikes. I think whether societies arrange marriages and how is incredibly important for their development. In traditional Asian societies that were unable to adapt to the West's tech... Holy shit! Wow! Which prize conservatism and social stability over all else. It makes sense since they arrange themselves to excellence. Hang on, it makes sense since they arrange marriage young. Young men push themselves to excellence in order to get laid, and so if you marry young people off due to family connections, you remove the sexual incentive towards progress for social. Wow! Young men push themselves excellence in order to get. That's not what I did. I said very nice things and was kind of charming. I didn't become excellent. I've never become excellent in my life. I have been merely adequate at most moments in my life, and I've still managed to have a healthy social life. So, maybe you've set your standards a little high there, Roger. Meanwhile, the West stopped arranging marriages and started having a sexual marketplace around 1000 AD. We did. Where is the sexual? Does anyone know where the sexual marketplace is? Is there directions? Can someone tell everyone how to get there? $50 for a blowjob. Like that's called hookers, Rudyard. After which the West has seen permanent progress. Does this mean that sex workers create progress? Actually, sorry, side note, I've been playing some Red Dead Redemption 2 lately, and it's made me think about, well, out here, Western culture and Western history. And yes, as a matter of fact, sex workers are how the West was won. So I'm not entirely wrong. Don't mind me. Pretend I got here. Meanwhile, societies that have given young elite males endless sexual opportunities without struggle have seen decay and decadence due to lack of incentive to improvement. Perhaps we know that's not true because you don't seem to have that many opportunities for actual endless sexual contests, and you can't proofread this, so that's obviously not true. Examples of this are colonial Latin America, the Roman Empire, or the harems of Asian emperors. Examples of this are what? That's... God, never mind. Let's just keep...
At the cost of the society's creativity and social mobility. Due to how dating apps work, young men today are having less sex, they make less money than young women, they are told by feminism their masculinity is toxic, and they are shown no...
I haven't been on a dating app in a while, but does Tinder routinely tell you that your masculinity is toxic? Because that would be hilarious. No, that's not what happens. Also, I have it on good authority from talking to Fairy Queen that this has in fact flipped. And now it seems that women are the ones who are having less sex. And all of these things suggest to me something that I don't think Rudyard is quite ready to listen to, is that more men are apparently having gay sex. Because suddenly women are having less sex and men are having more sex, and that this unevenness seems to suggest that some same-sex shenanigans are happening, and good for young men. I think that's, if that's what you want to do, go for it. But don't tell Rudyard, because he's going to get very upset when he figures it out.
No options by society, either towards manliness and honor or a place in society. I couldn't have invented better conditions for an angry population to make perfect army fodder. Also, unlike other countries, the US does have a lot of young men, with the largest young population in any developed nation and the lowest average age in any developed nation.
And you know what they're doing? They're not doing anything, apparently. Like we're very shocked that one of them has come out to a political rally to shoot at Trump, but they participated. So, that's a start. Like, we keep telling kids to go outside, and one of them finally went outside, and this is what happens. Everyone stay inside, I guess.
If young men are the top demographic for civil wars, the other is, as Turchin calls them, elite aspirants. These are the people like entrepreneurs, officers in the army, doctors, academics, and other categories of upper middle class or upper class people who are trying to gain outsized power and influence in society. In an era of good wages...
Why is it outsized? What makes it outsized power?
This social class is generally satisfied, thus creating low political stress. However, in our era of automation, globalization, immigration, and about 5 other things that push down wages, getting a college degree or even a PhD won't guarantee a good life. Even an Ivy...
It's true, getting a PhD will not guarantee a good life. That's always been true.
League degree in most cases will lead to a life of soul-crushing corporate work. In all honesty, out of my personal experience, the only people who have good careers today are those who are self-employed, like CEOs, freelancers, or influencers. And
CEOs are not self-employed. You are hired as a CEO. You can be fired as a CEO. In fact, if you are a CEO of a company you funded yourself, you know what you just are? Basically unemployed. You're Brianna Wu at the end of the day is what you are.
Since they aren't part of the problem of labor being so cheap today. People often ask me why social justice, a movement built around helping the downtrodden, is so concentrated among the upper middle classes. And the answer is that it's built around frustrated elite aspirants who want to use social justice as a technique to get their social category higher social status in an age when that's incredibly difficult. I've spoken...
So you're saying that social justice is just virtue signaling? Everyone has a better take than Whatifalthist. It's bad, but you know what brings in viewers. Why American politics boil down to college educated versus non-college educated? It doesn't, but okay, go on, King. The economy. The left wants college educated government workers to manage the economy. Meanwhile, the right wants to give as much freedom to non-college based businessmen. Okay. They go to school. They're called business colleges. I mean, they're not real colleges, but they get college degrees. And they're sitting in class and they're writing down things like profit is equal to income minus expenses. And then they're pretending that they've learned something. So yeah, like businesses have college education. You can't get a position in a business these days, at least a large one, without a college degree. Unless you have good friends. Social morality. The left wants college professors in various departments to determine social moral codes, while the right wants traditional religious figures to do that. I know of no one anywhere who wants a professor to determine what moral code. Most people aren't comfortable with professors determining their grades, let alone moral codes. The right wants traditional religious figures to do that. Well, what are traditional religious figures? Is the hedge witch that lives next door a traditional religious figure? Because if she is, I have news for you. She's not a Christian. Defund the police. The left supports replacing non-college educated policemen with college educated social workers. Policemen go to college. It's called a degree in law enforcement. I don't think you can get a job in most police departments that are not podunk little sheriff's departments where everyone is actually cousins without a degree in criminal justice. Foreign policy. The left prefers using college-educated diplomats for international affairs, while the right prefers using non-college educated military. Okay, stop. Please, diplomats are almost always political appointees of a administration who have paid a significant amount of money. Some of them are, in fact, former military officers. Almost all, and to be a former military officer, you have to be, have gone to college. In this particular climate in the United States, in order to be a military officer of any particular note, you will have to have gotten a master's degree to get promoted past the rank of captain anyway, or O3 for you Navy types. And Coast Guard too, I suppose. And for example, I know most O4s in the military are on their second master's degree. No one's putting the sergeant majors in charge of diplomacy for very good reason. Legislation. The left approves of college-educated bureaucrats making legislation over society, while the right abhors this. Legislation is made by legislators, most of whom go to college.
Spoken in these videos about how the political divide in today's America is largely that between the college-educated and the non-college educated.
But the right does abhor the making of legislation. Yes, that seems to be the case.
Elite. All of the left's policies today, when you boil it down, as I explained in this text wall, exist to benefit the college-educated and to establish agendas that fit their worldview and self-interests. You can see this in how they're planning on forgiving student debt. The right, meanwhile, is an alliance of the non-college-educated groups like the army, businessmen, and religious interests who also push those groups' interests. Both pick a group from lower down in the social hierarchy as their foot soldiers and whose interests to push secondarily, whether ethnic or sexual minorities in the case of the left, or the white working classes in the case of the right.
How very cynical of you, Rudyard.
The left wants to put its people in power through every institution needing to have quotas of certain oppressed groups, as well as hiring oppression priests or equity employees, as well as more government regulations. On the
oppression priests. Oppression priests. Geogracia. Who here is an oppression priest? Who here is an oppression priest? Where can I be ordained as an oppression?
The right side, it's from shutting off immigration, tariffs, less regulations, indirectly from having less women in the workforce. Both political sides have moved further to the extreme. This isn't social opportunities diminish inside these factions that are trying to seize power. There are internal struggles as people try to prove their purity and thus show their greater worth due to their loyalty. This process will continue as it already has.
Well, that's how you become an oppression priest, isn't it?
Extremely confident that the US and the world in general will experience a giant financial crash over the next few years, which will in turn result in pushing the many already struggling young people into degrading poverty, thus resulting in them becoming perfect targets for rebellion and radicalism. Honestly, when I look at incels, the first thing I think is them just being potential foot soldiers if ever I want to form a war band.
You want to form a war band, I would suggest you get friends.
There are a couple factors that historically determine who wins civil wars with almost ironclad certainty. I'm going to go through these here as a brief way to determine who would win in any possible coming conflict. The first factor, and by a truly massive factor that's impossible to overstate, is the military. In civil wars in which a nation has a professional, good quality military, the side that the army goes with will predict who will win the civil war with frightening accuracy. This is because the difference between trained and untrained soldiers in combat is so massive that if one side can train its soldiers, it cannot lose. The Russian and French revolutions only worked since the army refused to follow the orders to shoot the rebels and instead sided with the rebels.
None of that is true. The Russian army was incredibly fractured in the Russian Revolution. I explained this in some considerable detail, actually, in the video I do on this. And the French Revolution, yes, again, the army is very fractured, kind of going back and forth between factions throughout the revolutionary period. Like individualists, kind of on a basis of individual officers' ambitions.
Alternately, look at the Spanish Civil War, where the left-wing nationals controlled almost all of Spain, but then the North African-based fascist army was able to almost single-handedly win the civil war against them from carving across the country. The U.S. military has a...
Incidentally, that's not really what happened in the Spanish Civil War at all. The Spanish Civil War was incredibly bitterly contested, and it received a considerable amount of outside aid from other powers. Could you imagine handing in an essay like this? I've got a sneaky suspicion that at some point he has been corrected with. Has he dropped out or been thrown in fact drop out after a semester. He decided he knew everything he needed to know after a single semester of college.
Historically always tilted right. There aren't good statistics.
I talk about the military's political opinion all the time. You can get a lot of traction in the military talking about conservatism. There are liberals in the military. They tend to be very quiet.
For the last 10 years, but I see very little evidence that things would change. It hasn't been a completely massive tilt historically, but something to consider is that as the left grows more radical, it becomes more anti-military and against the values that hold the military together, like honor, discipline, and duty. Meanwhile,
that's just a wild statement, by the way.
Right, as it becomes more radical, becomes more markedly militaristic and pro-military. Thus,
those people don't look that militaristic. That guy's wearing a do-rag. That won't fly. Look at this uniforms, dog. Look at my revolutionaries, dog. They're not cutting it.
Process of radicalization, as will almost certainly happen, we'd expect the army to fall into a more right-wing sphere. Officers or those who provide leadership and make the decisions for what political side their units would choose.
He puts Clark. Oh, why would you put General Clark up here, who is historically liberal?
Tilt significantly more conservative.
I love this one too. The military tilts considerably more conservative, and here they are voting for Joe Biden.
Conservative as well, more so than the rest of the military. Likewise, a significant percentage of the left-wingers in the military are ethnic minorities who are divided between different military units and thus unable to reach critical mass to form their own military units. Likewise, ethnic minorities tend to side with the left since they're scared of the dominant culture, which tends to be encapsulated by the right, and often due to social agendas pushed by the left, such as homosexuality.
This is remarkably weird. Like, oh, the left controls everything, except the right controls everything. Which is it, Rudyard?
Sexuality, abortion, or transsexuality as abominations. The Biden administration has placed many left-wingers in high positions in the military, but I simply cannot see their officers following orders to support a leftist side.
Is Mark Milley a leftist now? I don't think so. Like, what?
In civil war. For the most part, the military would go right, with an exception being National Guards of left-wing states like California or New York. However, even in this case, conservative states tend to have larger National Guards than progressive ones. The second factor being control of resources, notably the necessary ones like food, energy, and the like. In short terms, if a side can control these, it can just shut off the power.
This is a very popular concept for the right-wingers. It's bunk. You know what those blue areas are? They are places where people live. You know what's in those places? The concentration of resources and the ability to get them. You know what those red areas are? Jack, there ain't nobody there. What are we at? We got an hour and a half. There ain't nobody there. All 6 people who live in the red area. Yeah, it's population density. Like the people, like if 16 people in a little farming town, like the red America's dying. It's true, and it's not great for red America. But like, they're not about to all simultaneously rise up and like besiege the blue. Yeah, I mean, the cows. Yes, the cows. They are revolting. Well, they're just cows. All right, it's 11:30. My roommate tomorrow has a surgery, which is going to take up much of my day. I am going to go ahead and leave you all for the evening. I want to thank you for coming. Thank those people who purchased memberships. It is greatly appreciated. We will be back this week with more exciting content, of which I will decide what it is. I want to wish you all a very good night. Have a good time. Go out, enjoy your families, and subscribe to the channel.